Welcome to this instructional video on installing the Arnott Coil spring conversion kit on a Mercedes-Benz ML-Class or GL, GLE, or GLS-Class W166 or X166 without ADS+. We'll guide you through the process to ensure a smooth and safe installation experience. Before starting, ensure you have the necessary safety measures in place which can be found in the vehicle owner's manual. Lift and immobilize the vehicle properly and isolate any stored energy to prevent injuries or damage. Let's start with the rear removal. First, lift the vehicle. Then, disable and deflate the air suspension system following the manufacturer's instructions. Now, remove the rear wheel and the wheel well cover. Disconnect the air line from the back of the air spring. Now, pull down on the air spring or use a pry bar to disconnect the spring from the upper retaining clip. You can now remove the air spring from the vehicle. Clean out any debris from the lower spring seat and remove the retaining clip from the upper spring seat. Then, disconnect the shock's electrical connector from the vehicle wiring harness and remove the lower shock bolt. Remove the interior trim from the rear cargo area to gain access to the shock top mount nuts. Also, remove the two top mount nuts from the shock to remove the shock from the vehicle. The rear removal is now complete. For the rear installation, place an appropriate jack underneath the lower control arm to support the wheel hub. Support the lower control arm for the remainder of the installation. Install the new Arnott rear shock into the vehicle, securing the top mount with the provided top nuts. Do not install the lower shock bolt at this time. Now, disconnect the rear lower control arm and the front and rear upper control arms. Unroute the brake line from the plastic bracket. Then, disconnect the wheel speed sensor and unroute the wire from the control arm. Disconnect the sway bar link from the sway bar and place the lower spring perch into the lower spring seat on the control arm. Place the upper spring perch and rubber isolator on the top of the spring. Then place the spring onto the lower spring perch and push down on the wheel hub to tip the spring upper perch into the upper spring seat. Ensure that the spring is safely seated at the top and bottom, and that the jack is in a reliable position on the main lower control arm. Slowly jack the lower control arm into a position where the disconnected control arms can be reattached. Now, reconnect the rear lower control arm. Reconnect the front and rear upper control arms. Then, reroute and connect the wheel speed sensor and brake line. Now, install the lower shock bolt and reconnect the sway bar link to the sway bar. Reconnect the ride height sensor bracket. Now, tighten all hardware to the manufacturer's specifications and reinstall the wheel well liner. Now finish the rear installation by reassembling the cargo area trim and seal off and secure any unused air lines and electrical connections. Now let's dive into the front removal. Keep in mind that the product shown in the installation steps in this video may look different than the part you are installing. The installation steps are the same, and all notices and warnings should be adhered to in the same manner. Start by setting the steering to straight ahead and raising the vehicle. Then remove the front wheel and the engine bay trim panel to access the top of the air strut. Now remove the airline fitting and the three top mount nuts. Disconnect the steering knuckle joint. Also, disconnect the sway bar linkage and remove. Now disconnect the air strut solenoid wire. Remove the wire guide and unroute the brake lines. Remove the lower strut mount nut. Leave the bolt in place. Also, remove the axle nut. Disconnect the upper wishbone ball joint from the spindle and separate the axle from the front wheel bearing. Now, remove the bottom strut mount bolt and pull out the axle. You are now able to remove the air strut. The front strut removal is complete. Now it's time for the front air strut installation. Install the new Arnott coil strut and guide the axle back into place. Also, install the top mount nuts loosely to hold the strut in position. Now reinstall the bottom strut mount bolt, aligning the hex collar on the bolt to the hex on the lower mount. Using an appropriate jack, raise the lower control arm to normal trim height to facilitate the remainder of the installation process. Reinstall the spindle assembly and the wire guide. Then, route the speed sensor wire and brake line. Also, reinstall the sway bar link. Now, reinstall the steering knuckle link and the wheel speed sensor. Reinstall the axle nut and tighten the lower strut mount bolt. The clevis on the strut will bend together to sit flush against the bushing. Tighten the top mount nuts. Then seal off and secure unused airlines and wire harnesses. Reinstall the engine bay trim as well as the wheels to finish the installation of the front coil strut. For the EBM installation, first remove the applicable trim around the driver's seat footwell. Then, peel back the insulation and remove the panel to gain access to the suspension control module. Now, disconnect the harness from the suspension control module. Using this table, splice the included T-taps into the indicated wires. Connect the EBM harness to the T-taps. Do not plug the module back in. Now, connect the EBM to the EBM harness. Secure the EBM in a suitable location and reassemble the footwell to complete the EBM installation. The full installation is now complete. Thank you for following our guide on installing an Arnott coil spring conversion kit for Mercedes-Benz ML or GL-Class. Proper installation ensures the longevity and performance of your vehicle's suspension system. Stay safe and happy repairing.